So my last major point, RF test meters. I see the test meters as really your best defense. Because what can you do about 5G? We're going to go through a couple things. You can test and detect the fields. That's very helpful for so many things. We'll go into that. You can eliminate the devices or don't buy 5G wireless devices in the first place. You can turn off the wireless devices you have, or you can turn them off for certain times, get less exposure time. You can try to get more distance from the sources. You can install shielding. Now, these are kind of in order of what works best to works least. So installing shielding is actually one of the least effective things you can do about 5G wireless signals. It's kind of a last resort, but in many cases, it is what you have to do. So for testing 5G, we find that more than 50% of people who think they have removed all of their wireless actually have not. I'm always surprised by that, but I'm talking about conscientious people who are really trying to remove their stuff. But if they don't have a test meter, they just have no idea of what they've missed. Just to give you a little bit of example, what could all be wireless and people don't necessarily even know it. Computer equipment, printers, keyboards, and mice. Internet gateways, modems, routers, telephones, televisions, audiovisual equipment, electrical appliances, refrigerators, washing machines, exercise equipment, health monitors, CPAP machines, electrical controls for lighting, heating, cooling. In automobiles, you got Bluetooth, radar safety system, different RF sensors. Almost anything that is electrical or electronic can be part of the Internet of Things. So test meters are our eyes and ears for finding EMFs. It's really hard to guess. Like here you think, oh, there's no RF antennas here. Well, actually there is. This is a cell tower disguised. And so many towers, there's so many more cell antennas than you realize. I know about it because I'm working and searching for them and finding them. But there's so many that are unseen on roofs or cleverly disguised. If you're wondering, if this was your room and you're wondering, is it high or low for our radio frequency fields? You don't really know. You have to test. If you're wondering if this neighborhood is high, if this was your neighborhood, is this high or low for our radio frequency fields? You don't really know. For instance, if you were in this house, do they have a Wi-Fi system that you're receiving here? Or is right over here, is there is the water department, do they have a wireless, a wireless meter system for metering your water usage? There's so many possibilities. You have to test to really know. It's virtually impossible to guess what all the RF and 5G sources could be. So when testing, think of those two different kinds of 5G, the sub 8 gigahertz, which is the low band and the mid band, and the high band, which is above 8 gigahertz. So the sub 8 gigahertz, the low band and the high band frequencies, most 5G devices and infrastructure will continue to use these frequencies below 8 gigahertz, similar to 3G and similar to 4G, which our present RF test meters detect very well. High band, those new frequencies above 8 gigahertz, including those millimeter waves, they will be used more sparingly, probably mostly in dense urban situations due to distance and penetration limitations. So we are in the early stages of the implementation of 5G. 5G will utilize additional frequencies above 8 gigahertz, but we do not yet know here in 2021 what all those frequencies will be or to what extent they will actually be used. It is likely that in the next 10 years, the main backbone for most 5G technologies will continue to be in that frequency range below 8 gigahertz. The meters we have now, which detect 5G bands below 8 gigahertz very well, will continue to be the most important meters for testing 5G in the future. So let's look at a couple examples now, and this is for testing again, 3G, 4G, the low band 5G, the mid band 5G, mostly everything that's out there. So my favorite meter right now at this time is the Safe and Sound Pro 2. It's for consumers use. This is probably the meter I recommend most. Another one is the Acoustimeter EM11. That's kind of a close second. They're both very good in, as far as I'm concerned, for our needs for detecting all of these 3G, 4G, and the sub 8 gigahertz 5G signals. And then actually these two meters, just to let you know, these are typically in like the $350 to $400 range. And there are lower cost meters. These are versions of those same two meters, but a lower cost version. These are under $200 type of meters. These are usually the minimum meter I recommend for me, the lowest for people, clients, the lowest cost meter. The Acousticom is maybe my first choice for a lower cost meter. And then right behind the Safe and Sound Classic is maybe my second choice. I think they're both really good meters if you want to save a little money and get a good meter for testing all of these 3G, 4G, and sub 8 gigahertz 5G signals. These two meters would be my choice if you're trying to save money. The tri-field is a little more tricky. If possible, I recommend getting one of these meters if you're trying to save money. The tri-field is okay, but it's especially good for testing the magnetic. But for the RF here, for that part of it, it's a little tricky, and I've found people getting a little confused by it. So it's okay, but it wouldn't be my preferred meter. Then, of course, there are professional meters, which is something we get much more in the EMFE course, all the different kinds of meters. This is just an example of the two of the professional meters that testers would use. So I think the information is changing. If you ever want to check out what is the best test meters at the moment, and again, on our website, EMFcenter.com, under EMF info, under our test meter guide area here, you can get information about test meters. And also there's a whole section on radio frequency meters, and each radio frequency meter, like that we just talked about, is listed there. So if you want more information, that's a place to go. So now, what about high band 5G? Those pesky new frequencies. We are in the early stages of 5G high band. This is by no means implemented in any large way yet. 5G will utilize these frequencies above 8 gigahertz, but we do not yet know what all those frequencies will be or to what extent will actually be used. Presently, there are no consumer price test meters available to accurately pick up potential new high band frequencies above 8 gigahertz. The manufacturers say they are gearing up for the higher frequencies, but don't even know yet exactly what all the new frequencies will be. And of course, we'll let you know when those meters come out, and that'll be on our website. So keep in mind that these existing meters we just talked about, like the Safe and Sound Pro, the Acoustimeter, that measure between 200 megahertz and 8 gigahertz, will continue to be the very most important meters for testing most of the 5G frequencies well into the future. I wouldn't wait and say, I'm going to wait for a meter that has also, measures 20 gigahertz or something like that. I wouldn't wait for that. I'm not sure when those meters are going to come. We don't know what frequencies are going to be used and opened up for that yet. And these meters here are still going to be helpful even when the new 5G high band frequencies are being used more. So again, you can get more information up to date from our test meter guide and going to our website. And remember, more than 50% of people who really think they have eliminated all of their wireless actually have not. Your best defense is to have your own RF test meter. So a couple more things. So that's the major thing you do. If you have a meter, there's so much you can do. So one of your things you can do, and you can eliminate wireless devices, and try not to buy any new wireless devices. So eliminating, you first test for it. So that's what you need a meter for. It is, oh my God, I didn't know that I had a cordless phone plugged in, or whatever going on. Test for it, find it, and if you can, eliminate it. And if you're trying to buy products, here are my 4 rules for trying to buy products with the least amount of radio frequency exposure. Rule number 1, choose a product with absolutely no wireless capability, with no wireless components. That's the easiest, that's the safest. You don't have to have a test meter to confirm that the wireless is off. If you can still, like you have a refrigerator choice, one with Wi-Fi, one that's not wireless. If you can, go with the refrigerator that doesn't have the wireless in it. Rule number 2, if you cannot find a product with no wireless, choose a device in which the wireless can be turned off. Now, the instructions might say you can turn it off, the technician might say you can turn it off. Until we actually test it and you get it and you turn it on and then you turn this wireless off is when we confirm it. Because often the technicians don't really know. Because what happens in some cases, you turn off the software, but the hardware is still emitting a signal. The signal is no longer intelligent. So it's like off in the sense of like it doesn't work, but it's not off in the sense of there could still be a field there. So we always need meters to test. So basically, my rule number 3 is always test with an RF meter to confirm that there is no wireless or that it is really turned off. And my rule number 4, only buy from a source that will allow returns and refunds of your purchase for any reason. This gets maybe difficult with big appliances, but you get something like a large screen TV. Like I got one at Best Buy a couple of years ago. It was a smart TV. Really couldn't find anything else that wasn't smart. Got it home, figured out how to turn off the wireless and the Wi-Fi in it, and was successful. Confirmed that with my meter. I kept it, but if I hadn't been able to do that, I would have returned it to the Best Buy company again, because they had a policy for 30 days that I could, bring it back for any reason. I would look for something else. So you try to find. So those are the rules that I go through to so I don't get stuck with a product that has wireless in it that I don't want. And here's an example. I could go out right now if I need a router and get this baby here, 4 antennas and the Wi-Fi and the whole thing. The same company, this is what I have. This particular model is not available anymore. It's too bad, things always change. But I have an 8-port router, totally wired only, no wireless. You can still find those. You have to dig a little more. You go to something like Amazon, they'll show you, 20 of these that are wireless, and then maybe in there you find one wired only. So you have to do a little searching, but in most cases, for a lot of things, you can still find devices that don't have wireless in it. And the way I use this, if I was somebody and I wanted to have some wireless sometimes, I'd like to not have this. I have a separate device that's Wi-Fi, and it's separate, and I can unplug that, and I can power that down, but this whole system keeps on working. So I like to separate the components. I don't like things that have everything in one, like a big gateway device. So other things to do, turning off the wireless, less exposure time. So if you have a device and you can't get rid of it, you've got Wi-Fi refrigerator, you've got a Wi-Fi washer. If you can, just try to turn that wireless off. Turn off the wireless functions. That can include Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, cellular. It's interesting because with like laptops, you could have a Ethernet cord go into this laptop, and then some people would think, oh my gosh, I'm wired, but that doesn't mean that your laptop is automatically turned off the wireless, not at all. So you have to often go into your settings and individually, manually turn off the Wi-Fi, turn off the Bluetooth. You have to check, and this is again where it's good to have a test meter, because you think you've turned it off, and then you check with your test meter. Even at my house, once I was getting measurements in my RF meter. What the heck is that? And went to my wife's computer and found it there. And even though the airplane mode was on, which always before when I tested airplane mode on, there was no wireless. Something happened in the settings, something reset somehow, and it was actually emitting Wi-Fi signals again, even though, of course, we had Ethernet cables and we don't have a Wi-Fi router or any of that stuff. So I'm glad I had a meter. I picked that up. I could go back and fix the computer settings again. So if things happen like that, that's why it's so good to have a meter. So again, you need to test to confirm that the wireless is really off. Otherwise, you're just guessing. And other ways that you can do this, like say you had a wireless printer and you couldn't figure out how to get the wireless function off, but you wanted to keep the printer and use it, you might put the printer on a switch like this, a little switch that plugs into a wall outlet, and then you plug your printer into that, so that you could turn the printer on for the time you want it to print, and you turn it off again. For example, what a lot of people do is when they feel they do have to have Wi-Fi sometimes, they'll have it on a timer so it's off at night. And here's a nice little device I like, because in this case, like let's say your husband wants to use Wi-Fi for a little bit. Here's a simple plug in the wall device, plug into an outlet, and you can choose to have this power on for like an hour, 2 hours, 8 hours, that kind of thing. So it's like a little handy timer in the sense like, oh, I need to use wireless now. you press, you have it for, you go for 1 hour and then it turns itself off. You don't have to even think about turning it off again. I like sort of fail-safe things like that. And avoid gateways and wireless combo devices. So here is a gateway, similar kind of gateways for all the various kinds of broadband services, whether it's cable or your telephone company or even satellite or whatever. Typically, they give you a box that has everything in it. It has telephone, here, telephone might be in it, Wi-Fi is in it, it'll have Ethernet coming out of it. And the problem is sometimes it's hard to turn off the wireless portion of this and yet keep the phones going and keep the Ethernet cables that are coming out of it going. So I like to avoid these boxes, and I'd like to have, so for instance, with my Comcast Affinity that I have, they came out with this box for me, even though I asked them not to, and I told them what I wanted. And then I had to take this back and put in what I wanted, which is a modem that they approve of that's wired only, and that 8-port gigabyte, that 8-port router we just saw earlier. That's my system. So what about getting more distance? So obviously you want to get distance from cell towers. One of the interesting things, of course, is when you're buying a house, can you get more distance from the road? So you're more distance away from where these small cells might be coming. And to be really aware, like here's a really, this would really make me nervous. I don't know what this distance is. It looks like it's less than 10 feet from this antenna to the window here, which is probably a bedroom. So really be aware when you're buying a house or renting a house of where the street is, where the power poles and things are, because if there is no antenna there, it might come in the near future. And then, of course, more distance from your neighbors. If you're looking at to rent a house or an apartment, do you have more distance from the neighbors, or you're very close? The closer you are in distance, the more you tend to get your neighbors' devices coming into your house also. More distance from wireless in your own house. If you have to have wireless, like here, if you're sitting here and this is where you watch TV or something, it'd be nice not to have wireless devices in the same room. In fact, what we often do is if they have to have like a Wi-Fi router, we might put it like in the garage, get it away, as far away as we can get from where people spend a lot of time and sleep, but yet close enough to work. So I'm always trying to get people's devices farther from them if they really feel that they have to have the wireless in the house. And then, of course, anything you're using yourself, the more distance you get from the device. Like with the speakerphone, with a cell phone, if you have it on speaker mode, you have probably like 100 times less strong exposure than you would if that was right at your ear, right where your ear would be. You really reduce your exposure with distance. And finally, shielding. We don't really have time to get into a lot of details about shielding. That's kind of a more advanced topic, but I just want to give you a little idea about shielding. And here again, when we think of shielding, we're thinking about two different kinds of 5G. In these two categories, because the shielding works a little different for each. So we have the sub 8 gigahertz, that low band and mid band, and then we have the high band 5G, everything about 8 gigahertz. Let's think of these as two different kinds of 5G. The sub 8 gigahertz 5G, most 5G devices and infrastructure will continue to use frequencies below 8 gigahertz, similar to our existing 3G and 4G, which are present types of materials that we use for shielding, actually shield fairly well. Now, these high band frequencies, the new frequencies above 8 gigahertz, including the millimeter waves, they will be used mostly in dense urban situations due to distance and penetration limitations, and they are easier to shield. So for the shielding of the frequencies below 8 gigahertz, those mid and low band frequencies, the shielding materials we use for 3G and 4G work well for the new 5G bands below 8 gigahertz, and will probably continue to be the most important materials for shielding 5G in the future. So in some ways, shielding 5G is not changing that much because most of 5G is in the same frequency range as 3G and 4G was. Similar signals in other words. But now the shielding for the high band 5G, that's where it gets a little different. These are the new higher frequencies above 8 gigahertz. They are more easily blocked. They travel less far. They're more affected by weather. They're more easily shielded. They do carry more data information and energy, but they're mostly going to be used in crowded urban areas like maybe sports stadiums and downtown. So when you're looking at the shielding for high band 5G, the holes in the mesh material must become very small or be eliminated. In other words, the holes in the mesh material start to become significant as you get up in frequencies of the high band. Continuous materials are the best for shielding high band. So aluminum and brass window screen holes are too large. Depending on the high band frequency, they may have moderate shielding effect to actually fairly poor shielding effect. But regular roofing and wall materials actually work fairly well for these high band frequencies. So you're seeing now your mesh shielding materials don't do as well, but your standard wall materials and roof materials are starting to do better for shielding the high band. Metal coatings and low E glass shield the high band 5G well. And just to give you an example, even like aluminum foil shields the high band 5G fairly well. So some of the biggest things that people have concerns about, well, what about my mesh canopies? So it'll depend on the size of the mesh. But basically, when air and light can get through, that means these higher high band frequencies are more likely to get through. So for the sub 8 gigahertz, the low and mid bands, these kind of mesh canopies, depending on the material, we're doing from moderate shielding to excellent shielding, again, depending on the material being used. Now, when we get into the high band 5G frequencies, these holes where you see through and get air through, that's going to be a little different. Depending on the frequency, they might work moderately well, but they might even work poorly. It's going to depend on the frequency, particular frequency of the high band being used, and also the size of the hole in the mesh that's being used. And another quick thing, what about shielding rooms? Here's an example of a doctor's office that I shielded a couple of years ago. And you can see some pretty good results getting from 210 down to 4, a very good decrease in the fields. And what we did here is you can see Y-shield paint on the walls. There's aluminum window screening that is on the floor below this carpet. And I don't think it's on here yet. There's a high performance silver mesh fabric on the window and also on the doorway. So we've got very good results. So these were results for 3G and 4G, and they'll be similar for most of the 5G that's here and coming, which is that low and mid band. That'll work well. So excellent for the low and mid band, the shielding. But now this room, how is that room going to perform with these high band frequencies? That's going to be a little interesting. I'm not worried about the floor with the aluminum screen as the floor shield, because the rug and the plywood, that will actually be adding to the 5G shielding. So that, along with the aluminum, I think the floor is going to be shielded well for the high band frequencies. The question will be what comes through the window here. And this silver mesh that's hanging here, will that be good enough to handle the 5G high band? That we won't even know for a while. It may or may not, it'll depend on the frequency. And what'll happen in most cases, there may or may not even be anything of the high band coming into this window. In some cases it will, in a lot of cases it will not. So this might not even be an issue. But until 5G high band gets implemented, we won't know that. And I doubt it will, because this is a small town. It's not the kind of place that's likely to get these high band frequencies. This is more likely to happen like New York and San Francisco and much more denser areas. So thank you for joining us today. For more information about our EMF training courses, contact us at EMFCenter.com. And I just wanted to mention that we still do have a promotion. This is for anybody who's watching this particular 5G webinar. We do have $50 off the e-course, my e-course. It's been going for a couple of years. We just updated it. It's got a lot of 5G updates, so it's right up to date again. You can use the coupon code and purchase 5G50 if you're interested.